it's in the breaking we come unbound. And it's in the giving we are found. Yeah, you could barely change.
Welcome to A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, a podcast dedicated to the telling of authentic stories and the sharing of insightful wisdom, exploring science and spirituality, medicine and Mother Nature. No topic is off limits when it comes to growing our personal understanding and supporting our collective well-being. With your host, Dr. Rob Abbott, a family medicine resident practicing spiritually focused and evolutionarily informed functional medicine, we hope to nourish your being so that you can flourish in whatever the moment has called for you to do.
And I know you tried.
In episode 52 of A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, I share space with the integrative and naturopathic physician, a pioneer in the field of nutrigenomics, Dr. Kelly Halderman. Dr. Kelly completed a family practice medicine internship with the University of Minnesota, has a naturopathic medical degree from Kingdom College of Natural Health, where she's the current academic dean of students. She holds certification in MethylGenetic Nutrition by the Nutrigenetic Research Institute and certification from the American Functional Neurology Institute in Functional Neurology and Neurofeedback. Despite the temptation to simply geek out in the world of nutrigenomics, detoxification, and chronic disease, we spend most of this enlightening conversation exploring the miraculous background and journey of Dr. Kelly. Beginning with a walk through her early childhood, we are given a glimpse at her spiritual background, the ethos by which her first years were imbued. Sharing reflections from her experiences witnessing her father's own chronic illness, Dr. Kelly provides a rather raw showcase of her first visions of healthcare, physicians, and the medical system as a whole. Stepping away from her years as a witness to medicine, she then leads us into her own years in medical school and residency, ultimately leading to her own period of suffering, disillusionment, and incredible awakening into the true power of healing when one surrenders to the powers of something greater. Offering story after story of her life's journey, Dr. Kelly illustrates the foundation by which she currently practices, blending her deep spiritual roots with her fascination with the quantifiable, the biochemical, and the poetically physiological. Stepping away to end our journey in the world of nutrition, genomics, and detoxification, Dr. Kelly starts us off with a description and definition of nutrigenomics. From here, she guides us into the practical application of how understanding one's genetic template, its current state of expression, and the nutrients we supplied impact the progression or reversal of chronic disease. Providing a solid foundation for understanding our genetic code, Dr. Kelly leads us into a thoughtful explanation of certain genetic variations, or SNPs, when expressed within the context of poor lifestyle habits, can lead to compounding negative effects and perpetuation of chronic disease. She even gives us a sampling of some of the most common genetic variants and how she is seeking to support individuals with these SNPs suffering from a myriad of symptoms and chronic illness. Dr. Kelly closes the conversation with an elegant summary of detoxification, including the newly understood Phase 2.5 and how we can apply an evidence-based approach to detoxification so that we do not end up in the world of expensive and potentially harmful green medicine. Lastly, I am incredibly excited to announce, if you were listening to this upon its initial release, that I've just joined my amazing team of functional clinicians at the Charlottesville Center for Functional Medicine, and am now accepting new patients seeking support through functional and lifestyle medicine. Using the links in the show notes, you can read more about our clinic and how to become a new patient. I can't tell you how excited I am to be beginning this journey here in Central Virginia with people I see as my family. And with that, let's dig into the show. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining me this evening for a conversation. I am really, really excited to get to talk to you. So thank you for joining this party, so to speak.
Thank you, Rob. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you tonight.
So like many of my guests, you've done numerous podcasts, and I'm always a little fearful when I first get into a podcast with someone who's kind of had a lot of good conversations, and I'm worried about making original questions and not wanting to be too repetitive because, who likes listening to the same thing over and over again? And so I try to spend some time to really maybe explore, try to get into some other areas that you've at least maybe touched on, but maybe haven't gone into great depth before. So hopefully we go into some ground that's a little bit new for you, because like I said, I know you've done so many of these, and I want you to be able to maybe do something a little bit different.
I'm excited. Like when we started to talk about what we may discuss, it really was a part of, like you said, a part of the interviewing that I've done lately is there's just been a ton of science, and, there's a lot that we can learn from a lot of the podcasts that I've done, but this is going to be a different look at me and who I am, and a little bit of my background that nobody really knows. So I think it's going to be really fun tonight.
Yeah. Well, I am just grateful that you were willing to sign up for this, because, like I said, I like to sort of go into different directions, and we will definitely go into the science. So if you're listening, we'll definitely get into some of the science. I mean, I'm a huge science geek.
We can't help ourselves. Exactly. We will definitely talk about that for sure. And more. So yeah, definitely hang on if you're science people, because we can't help ourselves in that area.
Yeah. So, kind of the first question, and I really have taken this from one of my mentors in really the podcasting space. And I really just love the question. I really kind of getting a firm foundation of, for my guests, what, are their spiritual backgrounds, or perhaps, more of a scientific background. Either way, getting an idea of what it was like in your early childhood when it came to spirituality or faith, or your first explorations in science.
Sure. So I was raised in the Catholic tradition. So, looking back, to me, it could be summed up as follow all the rules. Kind of the pagan sense of God was the Santa Claus, and he was making a list and checking it twice, and, finding the naughty and the nice. And, it wasn't a God of love. It was a God of judgment. And, that makes for a tough childhood. It makes for a tough upbringing when it's all about the rules. I found religion to be very transactional and not transformational. So I did all the sacraments. I went to confession, but I didn't really have a relationship with God. And, that was something that it was just kind of the standard. And I don't put anyone at fault. It was just, I just wasn't raised that way. Later in life, definitely I was blessed to be able to learn about the loving God and have situations that really led me to having that relationship. But, my family, it really goes back to my dad was an electrician, and he worked in big vats cleaning electrical parts, vats of trichloroethylene. And he actually lost all kidney function when I was 3 years old, and he was put on kidney dialysis and was on dialysis for 16 years. And so,
wow,
not only
16 years. Hold on,
years.
Put that in perspective for some people. I have a good, sense of dialysis and the procedure, but perhaps put that in perspective for people.
Right. So at kidney dialysis, you have to spend about 6 to 8 hours, 3 days a week, on a machine that cleans your blood. So your kidneys are basically one of your detoxifying organs. And my dad used to say that if a cobra bit him, the cobra would die because he was so toxic. And it was a rough life. There's no way that we could travel. There was no way he could come to my soccer games. He was very, very tired. He had to retire from his electrician job, and it just really robbed him of his life. And so what kept him alive was the kidney dialysis. And so in my family, I just felt this constant state of fear and constant state of disempowerment, because as much as my dad had lost his kidney function, I felt that he was also robbed of his power to innately heal. So, not only did he have the kidney failure, he also had cardiovascular disease, and it really wasn't from a nutritional problem. It was from, the toxicity of being on hemodialysis, and just over and over again, I saw the doctors that he was working with. Although at that point in my life, I saw them as healers, and I saw them as like godly, and that I wanted to help people, and my dad was alive because of them. So that's really why I went to medical school. But kind of looking back, I felt that he was taking away his body's ability to heal. So that's kind of the gist of how I was brought up in my spiritual background, which was really absent. It was more religious rules.
Wow. That's such a vivid description of, a quite traumatic childhood. It's something we're coming to understand much more of people's concerns and issues later in life stem from these adverse childhood experiences.
Right.
Kind of interesting studies looking at more specific categorizations, but just hearing that description as a generalization, that's traumatic.
Yeah. And I'll just go a little further, and I'll tell you that, when my dad was a breadwinner and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and suddenly, in order to stay out of poverty, my mom had to go get a job, and my daycare became the floor of a dialysis center. I'd roll out my Sesame Street blanket. My dad would put some books on the floor and some toys. And I literally remember sitting there and seeing from the floor the look of just suffering, unbelievable suffering on these people's faces undergoing hemodialysis. And I knew even as a child, there was just this language that I couldn't understand. But even when you're young, you can see a face, you can understand that. And that's what really drove me to want to be a medical doctor, because I thought that was the way I was going to alleviate that.
It's so powerful. And that face, I don't know of any other place really in the hospital or an outpatient setting that can be as depressing as a dialysis center. I know there's a lot of people that go in and do tremendous volunteer work and help people in those moments and in those hours, spending time with them, just being a friend. Because as you just said, people spend 4, 6, 8 hours a day, 3-4 days a week, receiving this therapy, and where else are they going to go? And so, it's a very can be a sobering place. And I think it's interesting that you made this point of something that I haven't really heard anyone else say. And I kind of was thinking it was something, it's really a radical concept, but this idea of robbing the body's, natural capacity to heal. And it's something I've brought up with a couple of my patients. I think if I first came into context when I was talking about bariatric surgery, and basically, in my mind, you were irreversibly changing your anatomy and resulting physiology from the surgery, so that you had basically robbed your body's capacity to kind of innately heal or regulate itself. You were going to rely on supplementation, rely on, you were going to need these laboratory measures to sort of monitor function, and there were so many other complications. But we had to start to be aware of the things that we do as interventions, whether it's reactive or meant to be as a preventive measure. Either way, the interventions that we do that are robbing the body, as you say, of its sort of innate capacity to heal. And I don't know, I think it's a concept that we don't talk about enough. Certainly I don't hear it talked about in traditional settings. And so I'm really kind of just was curious to get your thoughts. I don't want to go too off on a tangent, but when you use those words and when you saw that in your father's life, what does that sort of mean to you, or how does that resonate with you?
So it kind of really started when I was on call one night, and I had cut my finger. I was cooking the night before, and I cut my finger, and I have no idea how this happened, but in the call room, there was a Deepak Chopra book, and it was talking about the body's ability to heal, and, just being able to honor that. And I looked at my finger and I thought, regardless if what I do for my finger, it's going to heal. It's going to. I can't say to the finger, don't heal. So you just let it. You get out of its way. You don't do anything to perhaps get it infected, but you try to nurture the healing. And I was just like, my mind was, it was the aha moment where a lot of the things that we were doing in medicine, I had to take this big step back and go, oh my gosh, like what am I playing God? What am I playing God as for different conditions, if that makes sense? And, what are the things that I'm doing, like you just said, with like the bariatric surgery, where we may think that we're doing our best job and that, we're really trying to help them. But I see things in a different light. I really do, especially, with the experience of my dad and experience of my own health crisis, that I really try and just kind of give that a second look, even in functional medicine or naturopathic medicine. You just have to really make sure that we're not getting in the way, because God is the healer. I really believe that. And, we're just here to facilitate that.
Amen. Amen. So true. I mean, it just resonates so deeply with me, and I don't want to step on anyone's toes or necessarily make anyone upset, but I mean, you can interfere with that natural process with natural means or quote natural means, just as you can do it with, an invasive procedure. And I think that's something too, that we are not immune, even from a naturopathic, integrative, holistic perspective, of intervening too much and using things that actually are inhibiting the body's capacity to heal. Or what I think more broadly is inhibiting the person's ability to recognize the healing or be able to initiate that. Because as you just, I think alluded to, like, it really starts with, it starts with the person. It's not coming from an outside source as a human being. It's not like you as a doctor are not playing God. You are not the one enacting the healing. It's got to come from the individual. And sometimes we get in the way. And I think oftentimes we can get in the way in the natural perspective by just making things sometimes too complex when they just need to be, the biggest challenge for you is, you're having so much pain, you can't go to the gym. Like, so let's start here. Let's not berate you about not working out. Like, let's start with this foundation or mental, concepts. And so that was a little bit of a soapbox, but I think it's something that I think we have to talk a little bit more about, even in the natural space. Is, we say we're talking about removing the things that are getting in the way of someone's capacity to heal, but sometimes we are replacing it. While we may not be the ones doing surgeries or things or intervening with all these drug therapies that we find to be more invasive, we can still get in the way.
We still can. Mm-hmm.
So you started to kind of allude a little bit to that experience with your father, which is incredibly powerful. And I've heard you talk about before in other podcasts about your story and some of your personal health journey. And, one of the things I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on was, really, what was that sort of pivotal moment within the healthcare system, perhaps, as you mentioned earlier, that spawned this belief that I wanted to pursue medicine as a healer. And then once you were there, and you kind of had an aha moment, once you were there, when did you sort of start to shift gears and say, I don't really fit into this system as it's being played out right now?
Sure. So, the motto in our house was basically like, doctors are godly. I mean, and it wasn't that we were saying it out loud, it was tacit, but it was definitely, when anything went wrong, it was never my body could heal it. It was run to the emergency room, run to urgent care. So again, it was the disempowering model of it was so far out of my vernacular to be able to say, oh, I have this, my body will heal it. So, and that was just all started with my dad. I really try and get out of duality thinking, like the dual concept, like good, bad. I just think, in the space of he was doing the best that he could, but really looking at like the doctor was, the person you went to help, heal your body. And then if your body was healed, then everything's healed. So, and I won't say that I went into medicine just to heal people. I'm not gonna lie. There was a part of it that was really, really cool. Like you got to put on the white coat and you got to walk around and people would listen to you. And, it stroked my ego, and it wasn't the biggest part of it, but sure, it was gratifying. But, what I first noticed that, maybe we were doing, we weren't exactly healing disease, was when I got sick. So, I will say that before I got sick, which was in when I was practicing medicine, that I was happy. I was like, oh no, I'm good. I am very, very content here, going to work, putting the white coat on and writing the orders. I mean, I scored the 99% on the boards. I didn't miss anything. I was really good at my job. I was really good at it. And, I think that's the cue for God to come in and take you right out of, your comfort zone. Right. So,
yeah.
So I got sick, and I was on call again one night, and I was delivering a baby, and I had these migraines, and they came out of nowhere. And I had to grab the medical student to catch the baby. And I had been, telling my peers about the symptoms, and I went to a neurologist that was, in the hospital, and it was like, well, it's just stress, Kelly. It's just stress. You'll be fine. Just try and de-stress. But I'm like, something is wrong. Something is wrong with me. I never had migraines. I had some foot drop. It was just the strangest symptoms. And I thought to myself, after seeing a bunch of my colleagues who were brilliant, that we're going to get to the root cause. I mean, I was eventually diagnosed with MS, as I described before, and basically told to go home and spend time with my family, and given about 17 different pills. And I just thought, I can't do this. I can't do what I've been doing to other people. That medicine is wonderful. My husband is a doctor. My dad was on kidney dialysis. My son had asthma. I mean, I never will discredit the power of traditional medicine. I'm very, very, very grateful for it. But when it came to trying to help discover the root cause of why my health was falling apart, it failed me. And I had to move on. I had no choice to move on at that point.
You're describing that sort of moment that I feel like everyone in this space, and anyone probably listening, gets it. It's like, I've never been to a conference when and meeting people who isn't personally affected. And I will say personally affected. I mean, the individual almost universally is having some kind of experience, not just a family member who goes
Right.
through some sort of health challenge and then discovers other means of healing outside of the traditional realm. It almost always is some degree of, personal, whether it's a health crisis or just kind of, I say like a psycho-spiritual crisis,
Sure.
some sort of moment where you're just like, ethically, like, can I continue doing these things, and realizing that there's something more behind really this person's current state. And I don't know, it's, I had my own, similar journey of just kind of having that psycho-spiritual and sort of health crisis at the same time, and then emerging through that and realizing exactly what I needed to be doing. And I'm so grateful for that. While it was so challenging in the moment, I could never go back and just simply write orders or be okay with checking off boxes. And I agree with you. I mean, there's some things that traditional medicine is amazing for, and really grateful to have. And as part of my education, grateful to be learning about. But there's so many gaps there, and to ignore the gaps and to pretend that there's not something wrong there, or that we have some solution to fill that, is just it blows my mind. And that's the thing that probably hurts the most, is when you see that. And so, I mean, I'm kind of curious, in growing from there in your own health crisis, and you don't have to go into as much detail as you've done in the past, but was curious, like through those moments, was there a moment when you realized that the things that you were starting to do for your health to restore it, that you were going to be okay, that this was the way to, one, heal yourself, and two, that I was going to heal other people?
Yeah, I really think when it was I put it all together, meaning that I couldn't just heal my body. I couldn't just heal, my stress. It had to be body, mind, and spirit. It had to be everything together. And I really was opposed to. I was not comfortable with the whole, mind body connection. I was very, very one-sided, and the body works this way, and really medicine didn't really have I didn't really have to look into the mind body. I really wasn't, if we had a problem, we would get a psych consult. So with my own healing, it was realizing that we have to take care of all three, and just because you have a healthy body, if your spirit is poor, if you have a lot of resentment, if you have a lot of forgiveness that you need to lend, that is completely a part of being whole and healed.
Yeah. And it's amazing. This sort of, I almost call it like a phenotype. I mean, Joseph Campbell really gets at some beautiful truths when he talks about the hero's story and this, just like the hero's journey through things and how this evolution of this initial kind of egotistical drive and then the fall and this rise and going through these different stages, while the details for everyone in their individual life story are different, the same themes continue to emerge with almost everyone I've seen in this integrative space. And what's at the core is what you just said, that integration of things. It's like recognizing that there's something complex I cannot fully break down and explain. There's like an irreducible complexity to these connections. And until I accept that, like I can never reduce things down to just treat that, in isolation, because everything's connected. And I see it as beautiful. I don't see it as daunting. Some people see it as like, well, that's, it's the most daunting thing to approach is something I can't fully explain or reduce down to explainable pieces. I see that as beautiful. I see that as opportunity. And I don't know, I always just love to maybe get your thoughts on, you use some beautiful imagery of perhaps these, like you call them terrains of these different areas and how you're sort of addressing them. And maybe you can use this as a platform to get more practical and specific for people, because they're probably wondering like, want to know exactly what you're doing within these domains, but would love to get maybe your conceptual framework, at least first, of these different terrains and how you are sort of approaching that in a very practical sense with people.
Sure. Yeah. So definitely people ask me, well, how did you go from, pretty much debilitated where it was fatiguing to breathe to having, a brand new baby who's healthy and a full-time practice. And I do talk about the terrains. So the 3 terrains, body, mind, and spirit. So I notice myself that if I don't keep on top of all 3, I start to decline, because I still have Hashimoto's. There's some things that were damaged along the way. It's like if you have a fire in your house, you put out the fire and you call in the construction crew, but everything's not perfect. So I'm committed to. Here's my down to earth thoughts. I will try anything, whatever works. That I will do. And I love when things are backed by science, like, infrared saunas backed by science. I do a ton of those. My detox on paper doesn't look very good. And then I lived in an environment that I didn't have the best water. And I really had some chemical exposures myself. And so I have to use therapies that kind of fit my phenotype. So I do saunas, I do foot baths, I do lots of different things when it comes to detox. So I'm really careful with what I do. I'll do different nutraceuticals, but that really depends on how I'm feeling, and that's where I really think it's tough for doctors, because we don't live inside our patient's body. They're N of one, as we say in medicine, and so what I really try to do is I try to teach each person in my care how to try various things and then see how they do. And that kind of blows some people who are in their left brain practitioner. Yeah. They're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense in my left brain world. But really,
and you're supposed to tell me if it's working.
Exactly. So, one of the things that I've come up with, because I used to be a recovering left brainer, is that the objective measure that I discovered to track for patients and for people in my care is tracking their deep delta sleep. I feel that, I've been doing this for like 13 years, that if we can do an intervention and nutraceutical, foot bath, whatever, what have you, that if their deep sleep increases, that's a lot of bang for your buck. And so I do have people I try and teach them to do one thing at a time, because I cannot be standing there, Rob. You know how this is. I can't go home with them. I don't know when they come in if one of their supplements is making them sick, or if they're sick because they're sick, or did they smell some mold, or there's a lot of things going on. And so I really try and get down into the foundational pieces. I always say nothing trumps good nutrition, good peace, rest, and hydration. Those are my main things that, we have to focus on. But again, for, spiritual, I do a lot of journaling for gratitude. I make sure I use a device called the Brain Tap, because I'm not a good meditator, because I want to go. And it was able to really, it uses auricular therapy and light entrainment. It's like meditation on steroids. It's really fast and easy. And I found that it really does change a lot of objective things for me. So I really like that. And then, definitely keeping your thoughts clear, keeping, your thoughts create your life. So you be really careful. I tell my kids when we're at breakfast, I tell them, your thoughts are like a radio station. You got to tune in to what you want to attract. So, regardless of my situation, the Bible says rejoice at all times. And literally it says all times. It kind of blows my mind when I read that verse. It doesn't say when things are good. It doesn't say when everything's going perfectly. It says at all times. And I literally try and stay as positive as I can. And I think that was one of the secrets of my healing too, is that I realized that my illness had something to teach me, and that suffering was optional. And that, it wasn't like I felt like that every day. Some days I just wanted to cry, and I did cry. But that, suffering is when we're not just accepting what is. And when I started to accept what is in my journey, that's when I started to learn the most. And I will tell you this, and I think probably all your guests and yourself will agree with me, that we do not learn the most important lessons in our success. We learn them in our failures. We learn them when we're at the bottom. Yeah. And, it will sound strange, but I do pray for my children that they have experiences that bring them gently to the bottom. I don't want anything to crash them, but I want them to know that when you get to the bottom, there's a presence and a love that's going to hold you and carry you and bring you through, and you're going to be more resilient than you've ever even imagined.
I've been continually amazed by the depth of curiosity in so many of my podcast guests, and I found myself over and over again wondering how miraculous it is to bear witness to the amalgamation of Kelly Halderman's inspiring pursuit of spiritual truth with her uncanny desire to definitively understand the incredible complexities of human physiology. A living testament herself to the power of the human body to heal, Dr. Kelly showcases over and over again that medicine, and healing for that matter, is not an act of warfare, but an art of enlightened surrender. Whether wading in the pools of the mind-body connection or spilling herself dry through the bile canaliculi, there is no place off limits for Dr. Kelly and her passion for discovering how do we really heal. One of the things that I've really resonated with as a healer is kind of embracing more of what we traditionally think of sort of feminine principles of sort of vulnerability and just that kind of innate intuitive sense. And that's what you're speaking to in everything you just said. How can, as a presence and guide and, a guide with this individual, allow them to start to tap into that intuition and knowing about their body and help them feel safe as they're sort of, as you said, experiencing, trying different things. And because I can't be there, I can be as potentially an objective observer, an outside experience, but I can't be their thoughts. I'm not their perceptions. How can I allow them to cultivate a greater awareness and be present for that in a safe and supportive role? And I think, it's just something that the direction of healing and medicine is going that is going to go that way, regardless of whether we want to or not. I think it has to, because that's the only true way to really, I think, help so many people, because we're running out of options. The sort of paternalistic top down is really not working. And the other piece that I tie that to is also recognizing and allowing people to know that as physicians or clinicians of any background, that we're not invincible. We've been through hardship, and it's not just the silly hardship of school. Well, yes, that's challenging, and residency does have its own hardships, but what you're talking about is that deep burning. And I too don't want anyone to necessarily burn as deeply as I did, or for as long as I did, until I could come through that. But maybe perhaps a more gentle burning, or having some process where you do fail in some capacity and able to grow through that. And it's just something that that's how we're going to come to know ourselves more, to know each other more, and to kind of really break free of the things that are holding us back. And I don't know, I think as a profession, if we just are willing to be a little more vulnerable with ourselves and not seem like we're some invincible human being protected by a white coat, then I think more people will start to resonate and see that authenticity and recognize that they too can, you're a human being just like me, and together we're gonna figure this out and help each other. And I don't know, that your story and that piece right there was just so moving for me. And I almost don't want to segue away from it because it's just so powerful. But
we got to geek out a little bit.
We do got to geek out, and people are probably like, "All right, give me the science." So I will say I was drawn to you by that spirituality, your story, and it's something that really ties us. I mean, the other piece that people are now waiting for and going to get is this just deep connection of the biochemistry, nutrition, and really exploring these new domains of the interaction of our environment and nutrition with our genetic expression. And it's just something that fascinates me because it's so new and there's so many possibilities of how it can be used for a positive sense. And it's something that you are doing incredible work in, and really wanted to sort of at least give some good summary and background for folks who may not be completely familiar with your work or previous podcasts. Give some background about what are some of the things that you're studying when it comes to nutrition and the interplay with our genetic expression and disease.
Sure. So, I worked with Bob Miller, and I am certified in MethylGenetic Nutrition by the Nutrigenetic Research Institute. I'm one of their lead researchers. It has been a wonderful, wonderful educational experience to learn about this topic of nutrigenomics. So we're looking at the scientific study of the interaction of nutrition and genes. And we're looking at it in regard to prevention or treatment of disease. And I will tell you this, the more I learn about nutrigenomics and this exciting field, the more I emphasize the epigenetic influences. So, our genes are there, but we can do a lot of things to influence their positive expression. And so when we're looking at the epigenetics, such as our environment, our air, water, food, and stress, you really get the most bang for your buck, and not just running to the bad gene and freaking out and trying to treat it. Really think upstream is really the best approach to take. So I think it's the best, and it's the simplest to just tell people, just drink better water, eat better food, lessen your stress, and filter your air. But it's the hardest. We know that it's the hardest for us, for everyone to implement and maintain is the epigenetics. A lot of people, they don't want to see a doctor because they're sick of pills, but then they come to me and then they want a bunch of pills that are natural. So,
green medicine.
We're not gonna trade one for the other. We're going to get down and we're going to dig on what influences those genes. And I use the example of the mast cells. So the mast cells are what's called our masters of inflammation. And they're these cells that come in contact with where we come in contact with the environment, rather, is where they're very plentiful, such as in our gut and our hypothalamus. And so when they sense that the environment is off, such as heavy metals, different biotoxins, stress, they will degranulate. And when they degranulate upon exposure to that, they give off mediators. So one of the mediators of the 50 that they can give off is called TNF alpha. So if you have perfect genetics, so if I get someone's genetic report and it's pretty darn perfect, meaning there's not a lot of mutations going on. If that person is living in a place where they're drinking a lot of tainted water, they're eating at, sorry to say it, McDonald's, and and their stress is going off the roof. I don't care if they have perfect genetics, because that TNF alpha, it's going to slow down all kinds of genetic pathways. It's going to slow down methylation and other things. So really, we look way upstream. So I try and teach doctors how to think like that, and how to be like my 2.5-year-old who asks why all day long. you just keep going backwards, and you don't want to ignore any nutritional deficiencies. So we keep our functional medicine hats on and we do that, but we look at things like the cell danger response. And I don't know, Rob, if you talked about that in previous podcasts.
I haven't. I've heard it on other podcasts. So I'm quite familiar with it, but I think at least a little bit of a description for people will be very helpful, because it is, I think, a great description of what is going on in the body that we can't really see, but is probably causing a lot of issues for folks.
Yeah. So the cell danger response is an innate primordial response to threat. The threat can be, again, a biotoxin. It can be a chemical. It can be a physical or emotional threat. And the body senses this. Specifically, the mitochondria sense a decrease in electron flow. And what it does is it goes into like a shutdown mode. It signals to the body, we are under attack. We need to change up some things because we got to get rid of this threat. And so, for instance, it will purposely shut down, let's just keep this simple, thyroid function, a little bit of gut function. It'll spur on some symptoms that kind of slow the host down. So you could call that fatigue. And it does it to protect us. So that's fine. The cell danger response is a good thing. And what happens is that people get stuck in the cell danger response and they can't get out. So if we get a little bit of flu virus, it's the flu season and our body senses it, it goes into this CDR, this cell danger response, to help us. But what happens is if someone is repetitively exposed to, let's say, mold, for instance, their body's stuck in the cell danger response. And what happens is that practitioners will have people come in and they're chronically ill and they'll say, my thyroid's not working, my gut's not working. And what the practitioner misses is that the person is actually in the cell danger response. And the last thing you want to do is give a bunch of thyroid support because you're actually pushing sick cells. And I call them sick, and I use that term lightly because they're not, there was a reason why that metabolism was slowed down, but yeah. Dr. Eric Balkavage and I are teaching a seminar now. Dr. Eric taught for Dr. Ben Lynch. He is an extremely amazing practitioner. And we're going to talk about how you manage this, because first you want to shut off the cell danger response. You want to free the body up. You want to tell the mitochondria, okay, it's time to get out of the siege mentality. And really, that is a very small explanation of a very huge concept. I encourage practitioners to read Bob Navio's paper on the cell danger response. And then also, of course, come train with me and we'll tell you all about it. And what you want to do to help your patients get out of it. But I will tell you this, Rob, I myself was stuck in the cell danger response. Everything that well-meaning practitioners were doing to help me, I think was fighting upstream. It was not what my body was in the cell danger response for a reason. I had Lyme disease. But it wasn't until I treated the root cause and some other things that I freed up that cell danger response and got back into normal cell metabolism. My mitochondria started working, and then I was able to do more interventions to kind of clean up the, when the fire was put out, clean up the environment, clean up my terrain.
Yeah, it's a beautiful description, and yes, I encourage people to go explore this concept a little bit further, because it's something. Maybe going back to that kind of soapbox comment I made earlier about the things we might be doing wrong in natural medicine, in terms of maybe supplying nutrients that, yes, we're saying, oh, this person's deficient in vitamin D or deficient in these things, and seeming like we're doing something positive when maybe we're just adding fuel to an inflammatory fire. And, maybe the root that we need to remove is that mold exposure, or what's causing the cell danger response. But giving them the resources to potentially increase metabolism or increase, essentially it's going to increase oxidative stress because you're kind of having more throughput through the energy systems. You could be causing issues. And I know, I think I've talked about vitamin D before, in particular for folks who have chronic infections, and we're starting to understand that some of the pathogens are having effects on the vitamin D receptor as kind of as a way to go and be evading the immune system. And so I see a lot of people who may be getting on high dose vitamin D alone out of proportion
Right.
to vitamin A and other nutrients was a separate issue, but just, high dose vitamin D, and it's basically just all getting converted and, causing further issues because they're stuck in, they have a chronic infection, and you thought you were doing something good for them because they had, their vitamin D was 8, and not realizing, well, it's being completely utilized and are going down a pathway, and we have to be a little more aware of that. And so I appreciate you being able to, at least from a personal perspective, but it's, also as a practitioner, give a little bit of insight into, we need to be a little bit more aware of that and start to recognize patterns. I think what you allude to is sort of a pattern of maybe dysregulation in different body systems,
right,
and not see that necessarily as just, even in isolation. And what can I do to help this person now? And then when the body gets back to out of that cell danger response, then maybe we can start to explore a little bit more what's still having issues, what needs some nutritional support, what have you. But
absolutely.
You mentioned a couple people as well as sort of, mentors, Bob Miller, Ben Lynch, people that have been, huge mentors in my life so far in this area of genetics and interplay with nutrition and certain disease states. And was curious, I've heard them talk and sort of, there's been an evolution, I think, even in the relative infancy of genetics and epigenetics and this interplay with nutrition. Even in this relative infancy, there's already been, I think, an initial evolution kind of getting away from what you were talking about earlier of here's a bad gene, so to speak, and then here's something to fix it, kind of stuck back in the old traditional model of symptom drug or symptom natural medicine. And we're starting to see, better ways to inform treatment, looking at patterns and that foundation you described from a lifestyle standpoint. But was curious to get your thoughts on what you've seen as sort of this evolution so far of genetic testing, and maybe start with perhaps what it is exactly we're talking about when we say genetic testing, because some people may think, how do you test genes, and what are you even talking about? So what am I even getting when you're saying genetic testing? And then, from there, what are we doing in a practical sense for folks when it comes to sort of clinical treatment?
Sure. So, it has come so far, and I totally agree with you that genetic testing and nutrigenomics are still in their infancy. So I've seen a lot of change just in, I think, about 5 years that I've been really, really studying genetics. And so, when we're talking about genetic testing, we're usually talking about getting raw data. And we used to obtain the raw data from 23andMe, but they had a lot of issues with privacy, which we could talk about for a long time. But really, I using functional genomic analysis to get the raw data. And then it's up to you as a practitioner where you want to plug that raw data in. Do you want to go to LiveWello? Do you want to go to StrataGene? Do you want to do Bob Miller's software, MethylGenetic Nutrition analysis? So it's really what you're comfortable with. And I used to work a lot with looking at the specific SNPs. And so a SNP is the single nucleotide polymorphism. So it's, it's when you have a base change from the wild type. So basically the SNP causes the end product of that gene, which is usually an enzyme, to work differently. And you can think of the SNPs as causing three different things, is that they're going to cause the end product, usually the enzyme, to increase in function, decrease in function, or do nothing. And what I've really learned in the past couple of years is that there's a lot of number 3 where they don't do a whole lot of anything. So I think it was, genetics were, and still is really sexy, like, oh, what's your gene? What are your gene? What are you, MTHFR? But what we're learning is that, again, I go back to how important the epigenetics are, and really looking at your genetic report is not a death sentence. You just want to have a skilled practitioner on your end to make sense of it. Because I do work with a lot of people who, did the 23andMe and then they ran it through some analyzer, and they have MTHFR, and they started taking a ton of methylated B vitamins, and they just crashed. Yeah. And, it's really, I would just say for the layperson that, it's nice, but that's not going to dictate the rest of your life. You're going to get a far more, positive response in your life, not treating your SNPs, because again, they're not necessarily expressing, but treating your lifestyle factors and making sure that those are really working well. But, if you do have genetic defects, and I still run genetic testing on people, I really make sure that I'm looking at it in light of what they're bringing to the table, their phenotypic expression.
Yes.
So if I have a patient with cancer, I know exactly what genes I want to look at because they're reviewed in the literature. I go to PubMed and we, make sure that they're actually valid, because a lot of the genes that you're looking at, a lot of the SNPs, they don't mean anything. They don't mean anything. And that's where I want people to be very careful, is that, we studied the MTHFR. We've studied some, but a lot of them, they don't mean anything. So, let's take, for example, I have a cancer patient. So I'm going to look at things such as their PDH or pyruvate dehydrogenase, because I want to know, are they potentially doing what I call more Warburging? So after Otto Warburg, do they need to be on a ketogenic diet? So it's more of, it gives me ideas and clues about who this person is potentially. And then I like to do in vivo testing. Like I like to do organic acids, and I like to see what's going on, if they're expressing things. So you just can't, it's just not like a magic 8-ball where you just look at it and you know everything about someone. You have to be really, you have to find a good practitioner who can do that for you and help you out with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And I'm just sitting here resonating again, saying yes to everything you just said. I mean, matching up the sort of genetics, we know in medicine, the sort of genotype-phenotype relationship, and you just describing that perfectly. I need to understand the ground this person's walking on. What is really happening for this individual? And perhaps I can use informed laboratory testing to help get an idea of that phenotypic expression at the cellular level. And I think the simplest one, and it's still even oversimplification, we were talking about the MTHFR gene, an enzyme which is sort of implicated in our methylation cycle, and people have heard about folate and these nutrients. And one of the markers, sort of functional markers, so to speak, that we look at is homocysteine. And I think sometimes you can look at someone, as you said, just get their MTHFR, freak out because they have the worst quote SNP, and then put them on all these vitamins, and then things don't necessarily get better, or they get worse. And you could take someone and if you measure their homocysteine level, which is sort of a downstream metabolite in that cycle, one person with an MTHFR, genetic mutation could have a homocysteine of 7. Another person could have one of 27. And but maybe you don't test that and you just look at the genes, and the way you're going to treat that individual, and depending on what they're even complaining of, is going to be radically different.
Absolutely.
And so it's more complicated. It's more complicated. It takes more time to do that. And so I love how you're, the way you're working with people and cautioning people to just not get too caught up in the gene itself and looking at the phenotype. And I mean, that was just one example that came to mind for me. I was curious. I wanted to get, at least people probably wondering that, I've heard about MTHFR, and I know everything there is to know about that. But I was kind of curious if you had some insights, perhaps within that domain, like I said, the sort of genotype-phenotype relationship, but perhaps in some of the genes that you're finding, you're getting the most sort of bang for your buck, so to speak, by testing in terms of an actionable change. Like I can look at this and combine that with the phenotype and say, oh yes, this sort of treatment pathway makes more sense for you.
Right. I see a lot of PEMT SNPs. I definitely, my chronic people who come and see me, the PEMT enzyme is responsible in part for making our phosphatidylcholine. And actually that's how I got started on this phase 2.5, what I've coined that term 2.5, phase 2.5 detox, is that I kept having SIBO patients. It was like the revolving doors, like they get treatment and then they're back, and I'm like, what is going on? And I just started to look at this group's genetics and going, okay, guys, what do you have going on? And it was this perhaps, the SNPs were telling the truth in that they really look bad on paper, and then they really were, not really producing the phosphatidylcholine. And as you know, that makes bile, the fluidity of bile. It maintains the fluidity of bile, which is extremely important in maintaining health. And so, that's one of the ones across the board that seem to be in a lot of different conditions that people come and see me for. I would say that, the work of the Nutrigenetic Research Institute, really what they've done was revolutionary in that they've been doing these studies where they're looking at the genes of Lyme disease and comparing them to the wild type. And so if I look at a person with Lyme disease, I see a lot of PON1. PON1 is how we detox pesticides. So if I'm looking at that person and if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I'm sure going to see what's going on and see if that's truly one of their problems. Get them in an infrared sauna. When it comes to cancer patients, I see a lot of P10, KRAS, a lot of different things. I'm actually going to be teaching a seminar about that because I think when it comes to cancer, these genes are very well studied, but not a lot of practitioners know even what to do. Okay, so what do you do if they got a lot of KRAS, genetic mutations? Well, that's what I do all day. So it really is. There's really no set of SNPs that I see across the board other than those. And then I do see the MTHFR, and I see the A1298C in mood disorders. So there's some validity to those. But again, I don't treat SNPs. I don't think most practitioners are really moving away from that. If they did at one point, we're looking at the whole person.
Yeah, no, and it's funny you mentioned like KRAS. I'm very familiar from medical school. I would have no idea what to do with that. And so, some of these other things, and even the pesticide, the PON one. I mean, so much of this is so new, and I feel like I'm trying to do as much as I can to stay on top of this emerging area. And it's so new, and to expect everyone to sort of get on board really quickly, or to have the things be so clear cut it's rather naive. And so it's going to be a process of working together. And I love, like you just said, that the work of the neutral NG RI. And I think if people are really interested and really want to geek out, go find some of Bob Miller's podcasts.
Yeah, right.
Oh my goodness. He's got some great ones with McKay, Rippy, and Lime Ninja. He's done some other ones, but if you want to really geek out within that realm, go listen to Bob Miller talk. And he has the same belief system that we have about this patterns and seeing the patterns, but seeing the phenotype and not just treating SNPs. You did mention sort of in there, which maybe some people who have heard of you and followed you came to follow you because of your interest, and you're really just actually adding so much depth to this space of detox, or phase 2.5 detox, as you were talking about. For some people, that may be a completely new concept of like phase 2.5. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, I was following them along with the spiritual stuff, and then we got into science and like, now what are they talking about?
Right.
And it was actually something new, a new term when I first heard you talk, and really sort of expanded some of my interest. And I was sort of at the same time exploring it sort of separately from a different angle that had been recently introduced to me. And so it was just like, to me, it was like God saying, you need to pay attention to this. And was curious. I know we've been talking for a while, but this is just something that is, I think, incredibly, incredibly important. And for me anyway, it's something that I see a lot of, going back to, once again, that soapbox of potential harms in natural medicine of, let me just do everything to help detoxify the body. And it's been something that had bugged me from the beginning when I heard the term, because it can mean so many different things. And so I know we don't have a whole show on it because, one, you've done tons of podcasts talking about it.
Couple today.
I wanted to at least get your really foundational points for people when it comes to your understanding and your kind of definition of detoxification, and maybe use that to lead into what in the heck are they meaning when they say phase 2.5 detox.
Sure. So phase 2.5 detox came about because I kept seeing this pattern, and this was something that I saw in myself. I saw this pattern where we would try to implement strategies that would increase phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. So we were trying to get the body to get rid of exogenous things, such as toxins. Let's just take, for instance, toxins. So, you think of like trying to help the terrain. You want to get rid of the toxins. That totally makes sense. Okay. But what happens is that when you start to produce more of these they're water soluble toxins that are ready to be excreted into the bile. So your phase one is activate, phase 2 is conjugate, and that's to get it all nice and packaged in your liver mainly into the bile. Well, what happens is that under states of inflammation, which Rob, that 99% of the people who are sick are inflamed. Yep. So what happens is that the exit strategy for that nicely packaged toxin is plucked from the membrane, so it can't get from the liver cell into the bile caniculus. So you have these people and you're giving them things such as glutathione, you're giving them methylated vitamins and maybe some DIM, maybe some calcium glucarate, and you're trying to get rid of the toxins, but the door is closed. And so what happens is those toxins, they go back into the blood, and that's called a Herx reaction. And they put stress on the kidneys, and they can give you acne, they can give you brain fog, because you're causing more harm, because again, the door to get them out is closed. And so that's what I think it needed a whole new name, this process called phase 2.5, and that's the movement of the toxins all ready to go into the bile, and then the bile gets excreted out. And then phase 3 is when it gets eventually into the toilet. So it moves through the intestine, or it moves through the distal tubule of the kidney. So really, if you have got to open up 2.5 before you start hammering on phase 1 and phase 2. And that's really what happened with me, is that I just kept experiencing like kidney pain when I go on like NRF2 accelerator, for instance, a lot of sulforaphane, a lot of things that upregulate NRF2, which upregulates your glutathione production, and so on. And so what would happen is I just get acne, and I would feel terrible, and I'm like, what's wrong with me? And it wasn't until I addressed how to fix 2.5, I opened up the door, and that was by decreasing inflammation. That was by getting my phosphatidylcholine status up to par, because I actually have PEMT. I have horrible PEMT. I have homozygous. It was also through managing bad estrogen. So everybody in my practice gets a Dutch test to get a urine test to see if there's bad estrogens hanging around. So there's 5 specific things that close the door, that close down phase 2.5. And I teach in a seminar coming up in October in Austin, 5th, 6th, and 7th. Dr. Eric Belkavage and I talk about how to open that up. How do you do that, and how to identify it? So we talk about what is 2.5, what does it look like when it's working, what does it look like when it's not working, and then how to fix it. So that was a really short synopsis, and it's pretty hard to explain just words. Some pictures really help when you're kind of trying to explain this. So my website is Dr. Kelly Beat Lyme, so DrKellYBeatLyme.com. You can go on there, and I have papers and videos and all kinds of things to give you a clear idea of that. So, or just check out one of my other podcasts too, and you can learn more about that.
Yes, I think for people listening, perhaps they're familiar with bile, or they've heard of the gallbladder. And I always struggle to look around. I feel like we have an epidemic of people without gallbladders and gallbladder disease. I feel like everybody I see is, I've had my gallbladder taken out.
Right.
And you just start to wonder, like, well, what is really behind this, these issues, and what's happening in the bile system, in the canaliculi? And I think it's just a beautiful description, even as a short summary for people to get an idea of how important this system is, the output from the liver and going into the intestine, and ways that we're able to sort of fight infections and get rid of toxins. It's something that definitely gets glossed over in our education. I think we really focus much more on digestion, which is important, obviously, but I think it's certainly not something we focus on. At least that I remember in my medical school education, as this critical pathway for being able to help actually eliminate things. And as we were talking about earlier, cell danger response. Sounds like to me that what you were just describing was basically a great way to induce the cell danger response. Am I not right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So for people who, so you gave some great resources for folks kind of maybe in the clinician world who are wanting to learn more about how they can support patients and maybe start to look. I mean, I'm grateful that you've added some of the genetic testing and looking for PEMT mutations for folks, and maybe seeing that that's an issue. So ways to kind of diagnose and piece that together with the person's presentation, and ways to maybe at least initially start to support that pathway with phosphatidylcholine and different approaches there. Perhaps you can at least give right now for people in the clinician world, and also for people sort of as patients, ways to maybe learn about and maybe collaborate with clinicians. What are some of the things that at least initially they can do to address this? Because maybe someone, like you said, gets this diagnosis and they're like, wow, what's phosphatidylcholine? Is that something I can get in a food? Is that a supplement I have to take? Or I heard bile is a good thing or something I can do. Or I don't have a gallbladder. There's so many different scenarios, but where's at least a reasonable place for people to start as clinicians or patients wanting to work with clinicians?
So I think that the first place to start is to address the number one thing that shuts down phase 2.5, and that is inflammation. So we're looking at lifestyle factors. We're looking at good diet. So going back to the ringleaders of inflammation are mast cells. Mast cells degranulate when we get frustrated, when we're cut off in traffic. So really do not forget about the stress response. Do not forget that is part of why this physiology is breaking down, and it can be the root cause of what's going on. Definitely, mast cells respond really well to luteolin. That's a really nice nutraceutical that I use a lot of, again, because we live in a toxic environment, and looking at dampening the inflammation. And there's a lot of ways to do that. I recently discovered the benefits of hydrogen-enriched water, and it's such an easy thing for people to just drink water that has hydrogen in it. And the studies on hydrogen water are absolutely phenomenal on how it's a selective modulator, how it upregulates nerve 2 pathway. So, just doing things that are very, very upstream is a really good place to start. And with the PEMT, eggs are really high in phosphatidylcholine, but not a lot of people can eat eggs. So, you can take with your practitioners. You can try some phosphatidylcholine. I will say that, all our population is deficient in it. But really, it's not without, it's not just something that you can just use in copious amounts. You just have to be careful because it can upregulate acetylcholine and can cause some depressive side effects. So I'm always just really careful. I err on the side of caution, and I go we go slow with every implementation, and then track your sleep, track your deep sleep. I use an Oura ring. I just really love the way it shows me like what intervention I did, and then how much my sleep responded to it. So those are just kind of some things that you can do to start to really calm down the inflammation to help with the whole downstream effect.
So many things there. I mean, Kelly, I'm just blown away. This has been so fun. I mean, I knew it was going to be fun, but it was even more fun than I even imagined.
Me too.
Oh my gosh. And some people if you stuck with us this long, I commend you, but there is so much here, both from the science, the spirituality, and everything in between. I just really hope you're listening that you've enjoyed this journey, because it's what keeps me motivated. And I think it's funny, I've learned so many new things just from here. I think tracking the deep sleep is something I want to start to do more with my patients. And tomorrow my Oura ring is coming. It's supposedly being delivered.
Awesome.
Been waiting for like months from their new design.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just got an email today that it's going to come in, because that's certainly the area I need the most help with residency. So
Right.
I am going to certainly start implementing, and I love that as an objective measure, looking at deep sleep. So if there were any last final reflections, either in sort of that science world, either in the spiritual world, anywhere else in between, do you have any final thoughts for folks that you feel would just really help nourish and benefit them in this moment?
Yeah, I think that we have to remember we're all in this together. We're a community. We're not against each other. We're for each other, and we really just are here to support each other and learn from each other. So nobody has to be a know-it-all. And I will say that every day that I learn something, there's 25 things, if not more, that I don't know. And I really like to surround myself with people who are open to what we don't know, and just keep exploring, keep hustling, keep going. There's a lot to learn. And I will say, and I'm talking to myself here. This is really funny. Like count your blessings, is really one of my final thoughts. And that's for myself. Just be in the attitude of gratitude, and make sure that, we're just thankful every day, and stay joyful, stay, in that space. And I'm just grateful for people like you, Rob, who were able to have these type of conversations and be really human, and show the sides of us that aren't perfect and that are broken, and that have brought us, such a deepening of who we are and why we are here on this earth. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, it's like I said before, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I share the same things. I can reciprocate everything you just said in terms of the gratitude and the people that I continue to meet in this space that help inform me both from sort of the human level and that sort of citizen scientist level. I still see myself as kind of a human being first, and not anything above anyone else. I think we're all kind of in this together. So reciprocate everything you just said. And I cannot wait to meet you in person somewhere. I know it's going to happen soon
Right.
at some event. But I know you just recently moved. I think so.
Right. You are welcome in Florida anytime. Well, come on down in January then.
Yeah, I need a vacation in January, February. But I can't wait to meet you and and just sort of continue to hold these types of spaces. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you for your presence and willingness to receive a new narrative, a passionate perspective, and perhaps a deeper sense of connection with our collective purpose. Please share this podcast with any and all that you believe will benefit from its intention to relieve one's doing and engage one's being. Please share your comments about the conversation on our podcast page and leave a review in iTunes so that the voices in this space can spread to all ears ready to receive it. Music credit goes to Dillingham for their song Vessel. Remain open, stay curious, and forever be love.
You walked on fire.